Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's NATS chat. I am Kari Reagan, the host, and I would like to first thank Inside View Press for continuing to sponsor our NATS chats. And I'm thrilled to have Mary Saunders Barton and Norman Spivey here tonight with us. Thank you for joining us, you two.
Absolutely.
Let me start with just a very brief bio, but I will tell you that we are here to talk about this and many other things. Their fabulous book. I have so enjoyed it. And on the back are their bios, but let me just hit the highlights. So Dr. Norman Spivey is professor of voice and voice ped at Penn State, is a member of the American Academy of Teachers of Singing, past president of NATS, and is a Van L. Lawrence Fellowship recipient. And Mary is emeritus at Penn State and now has an independent studio in New York where her students are singing in many Broadway shows, both there in New York and of course the national tours. She is known for her bel canto, belto workshops and is also a member of the American Academy of Teachers of Singing. So let's start, before we get into the thick of the pedagogy ideas, let's start with the beyond the bio. Thank you, Norman, for that little term. I love that. And Mary, I love that you guys both talk about in here kind of the beyond the bio in the early chapters of your book. And one of the things that I've mentioned that stood out to me is the fact that you studied with Pierre Bernac in Paris, and Norman, of course, also went to Paris. But tell us just a little bit about your beyond the bio. What brought you to where you are today?
You want to go first, Norman? Should I go first?
Oh,
okay.
Just like our book.
Just like our book. All right. Well, the person who said beyond the bio, I think, was either Don Simonson or Alexander Brosseau to a tribute. Alexander Brosseau, do you know who that is? Alexander? Yeah, okay. Because he is archiving now teachers of singing. He wants to sort of build sort of an archive so people remember great teaching. And so he's calling it Beyond the Bio. And so that's where that all, and he has come to the American Academy of Teachers of Singing to request that we all provide information to him. That's where that all came from.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I am now actually chairing that organization, believe it or not. Kind of scary. So my beginning, I came in the back door. That's the way, really, the only way I could start this. And I have just retired from Penn State, as many of my colleagues know. And it's caused me, this occasion causes me to really reflect on what the happy accidents that have contributed to a really wonderfully fulfilling career. I grew up in 50s Morristown when a career in the performing arts was not really an option for someone like me, although my family gave me lessons in piano. I started playing and singing at a very young age, but not to be pursued as a career. So I went into teaching French. And as you suggested, I went off to Europe and studied with Pierre Bernac. I came back, and that was probably one of the more formative experiences of my life because it taught me so much about the grace of teaching. I came back. I started teaching on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. This is the back door part of things. And I was teaching young actors at a professional children's school. And I taught them French until I realized I wanted to be doing what they were doing. So I stopped that. I was married at the time and I started studying in New York City. And at that time there were no BFA programs. This was the 70s. There was no under one umbrella way of learning how to do this craft. So I took acting, singing, dancing, Shakespeare from many different teachers in many different places. I like to say that, actually, I should back up and say, when I was 8 years old, my mom took me to see Mary Martin in Peter Pan. And I was 8 years old. We sat in the orchestra and Mary Martin flew out over us and threw fairy dust on me.
Oh.
And I didn't know it at the time, but that pretty much sealed the deal.
That's amazing. And in case people don't know who Pierre Bernac is, because there might be people that live more in the musical theater,
Correct.
would you like to share for those
Pierre
of us?
Bernac, a great artist and baritone who was a collaborator with Francis Poulenc. And they concertized all over. He was probably, and then toward the middle and end of his life, he became an international teacher. And he would come to America a lot and teach. But I met him accidentally because I was studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, and a fellow student said, you know what? Let me take you over to audition for this teacher. His name is Pierre Bernac. I did not know who that was.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to his studio at La Rue de la Motte-Piquet in Paris. And he was a tall, gracious, courtly gentleman in his early 70s. And just the most elegant of humans. We both auditioned. I sang Après un rêve for him, I remember. And I sounded, and he said, oh, la cocotte. And he said I was an enfant de chœur because I had a little piping voice. And he did not turn me down.
Oh, it's so wonderful. I love that.
And 2 years later, I had learned a whole lot.
Yeah, I bet.
Not just about singing, although a great deal about singing. A great deal about singing. He would always, when he taught, the hand was always doing that. It was the arc of the phrase, the beauty, and the meaning.
I love that. And Norman, you too, again, we talked earlier about that you two have these parallels in your lives that are fascinating, but you won a Fulbright that took you to Paris as well.
Right. It was a lucky, lucky time. So Mary was just talking about her a la carte training. And back in the day, I mean, there were no BFA programs in music theater, and there were no pedagogy degrees. But so clearly, I can see that I was a voice teacher even when I was an undergrad student because of how curious I was, how I would impose upon my friends and say, please tell me about your singing, and can I learn the accompaniments to your arias and try to understand what it is you're doing, because it fascinated me. But I was on the track in voice performance degrees. And then, as you say, I had this Fulbright. So I was working with Suzet and Baquier, these other great French baritones. There were many of them. And started working more and more, doing a lot of freelance work and concert work. And I got a call from my undergraduate teacher saying that a visiting assistant professor post was open and would I like to come and do it. And of course, that's what I had been preparing for all along and what really interested me so much. So I was delighted. And you learn to grow into the job, and you learn through your colleagues and through the literature and through continuing to study how to formulate your ideas and put together a pedagogy program. And over time, it really blossoms. But I think I have always set out to learn from those around me. And so this is really like a Valentine to NATS, that we're better to have this kind of opportunity than through our colleagues with NATS. Mm-hmm. So even though I had a lot of offices and a lot of obligations, it also brought me a lot of opportunities to travel around the country and through Canada and abroad and meet other NATS teachers and see their work and learn from them. And I guess the collaboration with Mary and learning from her, I guess really that back and forth, over time it became really apparent that maybe we had a conversation that this book could kind of contain.
Love it. Well, it's such a great resource, and I'm sure you've already had a great deal of feedback and thank you from our colleagues about how this book has helped. Well, let's dive in a little bit and talk talk cross-training. And let me remind the attendees that this is your chat, so we really encourage questions. There's a little box in the GoToWebinar control panel, so you can type a question and I will see it, and I will ask our guests on your behalf. And if anybody wants to ask a question with their microphone opened, rather than typing, you just raise your little virtual hand and I will open your mic in that case. So let's start with, you know, cross-training, of course, is for both classical singers and CCM. Specifically, let's talk about about Broadway and music theater. Let's start there, and I would love to hear you both talk about the broad spectrum of what we now call Broadway. It's no longer simply, you know, 2 or 3 sound productions. It's an array. So would you both just kind of expand on that idea?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Broadway today. I actually made myself a little list. Where did I write it? Well, thinking about what's on Broadway today, it's kind of astonishing when you think about the variety of material, the variety of types of vocalism, from Hamilton to Mean Girls to My Fair Lady, which we just saw last week, to Carousel. We have our golden age, to the jukebox musicals like Beautiful. Those are all aspects of a kind of vocalism that every working actor in New York, every musical theater performer needs to be comfortable with, in order to, because what we're trying to do is expand the castability, the casting possibilities for these actors. The functional training that they need is key to that, which is what Norman and I have tried to put forth in the book, that it is really not, we are not really talking specifically about stylistic training, but about basic foundational training to prepare for any style that is presented. So right, Norman, did you want to say something?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to say something more about that?
I just would say the functional training really transcends whether you're coming from a Broadway repertoire to classical or from classical to Broadway. Finding the continuum, finding the flexibility of sounds is really what you need, not only to survive in the material, but to tell the stories, to fulfill the lyric.
Yep.
And that's what it's always about in every genre, isn't it? It's, you know, communication. Mary, were you looking at your notes? Did you?
I was trying to find where I wrote the list of all the different shows, but I can't find them because I had a huge list that was bigger than that one. But you guys know what's on Broadway, basically. Yeah.
We have a question actually. From Colin. Can basic training truly prepare you for any style, or do musical theater performers also need to gain as much specific training as they can to make themselves competitive?
What? Ask that one more time.
Yeah. So the first sentence is, can basic training truly prepare you for any style? Question. And then, or do music theater performers also need to gain as much specific training as they can to make themselves competitive?
Can I jump in there? I would say basic training, maybe we would need to define what that is, but it sounds to me like it is entry-level voice preparation, maybe voice hygiene, maybe evening registers and that sort of thing, which is key for everyone. And then I would say there is specific training for all different genres. So if you're going to specialize in early music or Mozart or the Verdi repertoire, there would be special things you would want to know about that. And just like if you're going to be working in pop style, golden age.
He clarifies specific specific training regarding styles like jazz, classical, rock, pop, or pop, folk.
Right, which that's different kind of training.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say functional training is to prepare you to then immerse yourself in different styles.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So good. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. You're welcome, Colin. On behalf of Mary and Norm, you're welcome. But the bottom line is the sounds that are coming out of Broadway is just vast. And that for singers to be employable, they have to train not only functionally, but then they do have to expand and know how to make these different qualities of sound.
Right. Right.
Do you think the days are gone of, a Kelly O'Hara or a Audra McDonald who get to really specialize in their legit area? Do you think those days are gone, or what do you think?
All right. That I think is a big subject, because I think if you have a star, like a beautiful, wonderful, talented star like Audra McDonald or Kelly O'Hara, or even Rebecca Luker, and to a certain extent Vicki Clark, those are actors who have reached a certain elite level and get a pass. They get a pass, even though, both of them, Audra McDonald and Kelly O'Hara, can stretch quite far. They are not really doing what we are encouraging our students to do for the most part. They are not actually carrying a chest dominant sound much past a B flat 4. And I think it's I agree with you, Kari. I think it's probably not going to be possible to hold yourself out of that, to keep yourself from doing that repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
I think
we find the same thing in opera. Once people achieve a certain status, the rules around Fach, right, are somewhat broken. They can sing whatever they'd like. They can record whatever Fach that they want to.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's why we wrote the whole chapter on crossover, because the whole concept that you could cross over and sing really inauthentically in a musical because you're a star is not really the way of the future. I think that everybody's going to accommodate to what was written. Kelly O'Hara, she's such a star that Jason Robert Brown broke his own style.
Right, for sure.
And he wrote for her.
Yes.
So I think and to great advantage, by the way. I think Bridges of Madison County is glorious. So there are many things that, breaking rules is part of it. But I think that the training we're talking about is to prepare our singers for all eventualities, and to keep them healthy in that. I think the argument that is frequently made is that is not necessarily the healthiest way for a voice to function. So I think Norman and I have tried to make the case that it actually is a very balanced way to function, but you just have to attend to it. You have to be sure that you are using your whole voice all the time, because as soon as you tilt it out of whack, then the tendency to push in a way that is not healthy can happen. So we're trying to create a sense of ownership in our students and our singers, that they need to take charge of that balance as they move on into their professions, because it's not easy.
Kate Baker says, so why are they being pushed to do this?
Who? The singers?
Yes, I assume that's who she's referring to.
This is the case. If they want to turn down an audition because they think, okay, that's not really my area of expertise, I'm not comfortable in that, then that's their option. But then I would go running back to my teacher if it were musical theater. And I would say, I had to turn down 3 auditions because I can't really use my voice in that manner. And it's going to cost me opportunities. It's just realistic. But it's also, I think, ultimately, if it's the healthiest way to be for musical theater. But choosing one side of the voice and staying there, I don't think is the healthiest way to function. I think it's actually limiting and ultimately could be costly, which Norma, do you agree with me?
Totally. When you can access a wider continuum, the
Right.
things that are already your niche are going to be easier, are going to be more resilient. And there's just so much less to fear,
Right.
right?
So I feel like, Kari, what we're talking about here is a little bit, this is our little, we've curated our little area here. I think this is what teachers do. We curate our area. It's like a little show and tell. We say, this is what, when I came to Penn State, this is what happened. We thought, this kind of works. If we just coordinate this way between classical and musical theater, all our musical theater students are starting to love doing classical music. It's a privilege. Why shouldn't they try it? And vice versa, as when the classical students started, right. Now, we didn't focus in the book as much on that carrying of musical theater into classical in the book, although Norman is using it a great deal. I mean, he really does introduce musical theater and the qualities of training that we use in musical theater in his classical teaching as well, I know, to great benefit. But it's all empirical knowledge, and it's not like we can say, oh, we're just watching it over time, over 18 years, and we're saying, that seemed to work quite well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, even our classical singers, I mean, of course, many of us have been cross-training for years. We've known to do this. And, I've always said to the classical singers, you want to be marketable. And so maybe you're going to, if you have the chops for it, sometimes you're going to get to sing in a jazz, ensemble for a few weekends and make some money. So you have to be prepared. Plus, it helps their classical singing. And I mean, we all know there's just so many benefits.
There are.
These cross-training principles.
I think if we're going to really simplify what's at stake here, it's whether or not there is a belief that there's some harm in tipping the scales in a classical singer and adding too much chest voice to the detriment of the classical voice. I have seen, and I teach a lot of classical singers, male and female, who want to make the shift. And it's fascinating because many of them just want it so badly because they know that they will have more options in terms of performing. Others have felt they should try it, but are really terrified. They have voices in their head that say, this sounds so ugly to me, right? This sounds, or this is hurting me because it sounds ugly. All of those.
Or they've been told, I mean, Norman, we come from a generation of, our teachers always said, oh, you mustn't sing in the chest voice, you'll get nodules, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's still a pervasive point of view.
It is. Norm, I'd actually like to ask you this. I have a colleague who does believe that when we're working with our undergraduates, let's say, who are just finally starting to learn how to sing classical singing and get the resonance strategy and all that goes with that. And I know his fear is that when they're working so hard to achieve that basic sound, anything else is going to pull them out of that. I think there can be an argument made for that, but I think there can be an argument made for with singers by making the other sounds, it helps them to find the opposite spectrum. So I'd love to hear your thinking about that.
Well, we actually said in the book, if you can't take things apart, was it ever really together? Right? So it's kind of an odd way to phrase it, but you should be able to be playful. You want to be playful. I'll just give you, there's so many things that go in my mind, and all the students, I'm seeing them in front of me right now and the work we're doing. But I think the exercises in the book, where it really is the gamut of things that are very light, very head dominant, to things that are very full and very chest dominant, and then back and forth so that one is never stuck. One is always trying to find the balance from the various ingredients. I don't know how that would pull you out of another alignment. It really just gives you more tools, more options, more colors in your voice. So I could give you specifics with various students if you'd like, but
I think that's great. I think honestly, this person in particular that I'm thinking of, just does not like music theater, just doesn't. And so I think don't teach that then,
Oh,
but it would
absolutely.
still be lovely if everybody could subscribe to this idea of cross training. It just, it does make sense when we look at the sports science and the evidence. And
Sure does.
one of the things to bear in mind when you look at that whole list of Broadway shows Mary was talking about, you really have to be mindful that aesthetics have to take a back seat. And you are talking about the sounds that make sense. So whether that is an indigenous sound, a vernacular sound, I don't think it's for us to judge whether that is aesthetically beautiful or not. Is it functional? Is the student healthy? Is it telling the story?
we are getting a bunch of questions, and I want to let me ask a few of them because I definitely want to get into our mixed conversation that we talked about in the pre-chat. But let's flesh out some of these for a few minutes. Carolyn asks, I was in a conversation with a teacher at a major university. They are losing their classical singers to music theater. What would be a good career business model for a young singer?
A good career business model. I mean, I think they need to pursue their passion. If classical, you're saying that this person knows that classical, is this true that the classical programs are depleting as a result of musical theater? I think that may be in fact true because musical theater is so popular and accessible, and the career seems so much more accessible than a classical career in opera right out of the chute.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
You would agree. So that may be why they jump into that. They say, "Ooh, I'll have work."
Mm-hmm.
So the career model is, if your passion is to do theater, if that's what you really want, then you just train and train and train to make yourself ready. But it starts right away. It's not that you're going to go into training programs after college. You're going to try to start right away and continue training as you perform. Grad school is possible, but it's not. That isn't the grad school in operatic training is almost a given practically. You don't leap right in, or you go to continue program.
Right. Have there been any studies on the longevity to singers who are doing both types of singing?
I'm wondering, have you heard of any, Norman?
I haven't.
I have not. And again, at what level, I've often talked to my students about, do we have any singers yet that are at an elite level across genres? We do have Kelly, who did, right, at the Met, but he's a legit music theater singing a very particular quality that lends itself to opera. We haven't had, to the best of my knowledge, an Idina Menzel who jumps over to the Met. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
I don't think that's happened yet.
Do you think we will?
Yes.
I would hope we would.
I think we will. And also, when you think about it, opera is changing. The composition of opera is changing.
It is.
And in some ways, it's become, that was a subject that I think you were going to bring up about opera and musical theater, or whether I would associate musical theater with CCM or with opera. And I think it lies somewhere between, but I make the association that they are both dramatic art forms, whereas CCM is not necessarily a dramatic art form. It can be. Musical theater stands by itself in that sense and is more aligned with opera, which has the potential for raising us all out of our seats theatrically. So, and that is true of musical theater. So I think that the future, my crystal ball says it's possible. And you certainly see what's happening out there. You see that that our opera companies are bringing musicals into the season. There's more unification, there's more alignment between the two art forms than there ever has been. I personally think that's a good thing, because I think that they can cross-pollinate as art forms. I don't feel that one should. There'll be a lot of pushback about that, but I think they are not mutually exclusive as art forms. They share certain very kind of critical things. The main difference certainly would be that the accent is on sound when you're talking about opera, for sure, and is on the word still in musical theater.
And as we have better trained teachers, I mean, this past decade, teaching singing has changed tremendously. And as that continues to grow and singers of all genres have expert teachers to go to now, I think, it opens up a world of possibilities. I don't think that was the case 20 years ago.
Well, I think that was one of the driving forces that kept us writing this book, was that we wanted teachers to be sure to feel they had permission, they didn't have to fear this kind of work, and that they could just play. And that is, you discover it as you go, but you have to go, right?
Yeah. Lori says, wasn't there a tenor who started out as a rock singer and then sang at the Met? Do you guys know any of that? Gosh, if you find out the name, Lori, type it to us.
Yeah.
We're getting.
Sorry. I'm hoping that a lot of people who are tuned in, and Kari, maybe you were there when Stephanie Blythe gave the concert with Christine Brewer at our last national conference. And I just don't know that I have heard such an easy crossover from Stephanie Blythe to stand up and sing the habanera and then oratorio, and then just one belt number after the next, so balanced, so moving. And all of us were out of our chairs after every song. They
will be my guests later this year, Norm. I'm happy.
I know. So great.
And actually, it's not that surprising, because she sings in such a balanced way in her classical singing. Yeah. So of course I should have expected that, right? It was a delight.
All right, I am so behind, so let's pile through these. There's some great questions coming in. Can you provide some insight on how singing in a belt style will feel different than a classical loft style? What should students be okay with, and what feelings can be signs of harm or going too far for the moment? Great question, Colin. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Who asked that?
This is Colin Brisky. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Colin.
Great question. So it's important to trust a process when you are working outside your comfort zone, because it's a challenge. And if you're going too far, you're going to feel not so much pain as a sense that this is not healthy communication. And I would have to say that if there's too much pressure or subglottal pressure, you're going to know it. But it's going to feel different from loft when you reach the point, or let's say it's a woman, and you reach a point where, if you're a classical singer, you would naturally be releasing into more head voice around B flat 4. If at that point you decide that you are trying to, Kari works on this all the time, I'm sure with her students, keep the speech quality going, mode 1 dominant going, and you have not done that before, you will feel wrong. Wrong. And it's going to feel dangerous, probably, and it will possibly be too pressured. That doesn't mean that you will wake up with nodules the next morning. As a matter of fact, the only way to do this is to cross through that. So you have to be brave and insist, but you also have to be smart and not crazy. And that's why you need to trust the process and your teacher, right? But if you don't insist, then you won't have the ingredients to make it happen. So it's a tricky thing working through there. And this is what we were talking about regarding mix. And we can talk about that later. You want to talk about that later, but
yeah.
What the transition feels like. How do you know you're in trouble? You won't be in trouble. You'll just be in a process. You'll be in a process. as you move.
And I would encourage teachers who have never made these sounds that want to start teaching these sounds, right, of a mode 1 belt, whatever's along that continuum. They need to take lessons with somebody to help them experience those sounds in themselves as well. Don't you think that's—
Absolutely. If you're teaching it, it's to your great advantage to work on making those sounds, even if you've never made them either. We have a workshop that we do at Penn State called Bel Canto and Belto, where teachers come and just in a very safe environment, give it a try. It's a great way to sort of build your confidence as a teacher too, because it's hard to teach something, a sound you've never made. It's going to feel scary.
And one of the things we thought was really important was to have the audio component to the book, so that you can actually hear these sounds being made and identified. And sometimes a student will miss it and they have to go back and find it again, and that's so telling. That's the best.
Very much so. And also, you know, the main point of departure that I take for teaching this mode 1 dominant mix, and that I feel is the surest way to avoid problems, because basically you are teaching speech when you're teaching this, is to launch from speech, from actual speech, and to see how far and how rangy your speech can be. Because voice and speech classes in musical theater are a really vital part of the training. Well, I think, frankly, for opera as well, I would say, or for any singing art, because they extend speech both directions, down and up, and give you a sense of how you would energize your speech higher, so that you can then, because you can't do that. If you cannot do that, it's very hard to sing there. Matter of fact, I would say virtually impossible without way overweighting the instrument. So just finding a way to speak those sounds. Isn't this so funny, talking about singing?
It is. I was thinking the same. People are going, can you show us? I'm like,
because I just want to leap up and go to the piano and say, hi! I just feel like this is so hard to do.
They would probably love that, Mary. So please feel free. You have so many wonderful exercises in the book. And as you said, the audio is there. So, you know, tonight we're kind of organically talking about it.
Of course. And you're really good at it. It's just so strange to me to
It
talk
is.
about something that we have to hear in our heads. How will I know if I'm in trouble?
Make a sound. Can you make a sound that you would, for a teacher, that would be a little bit of a red flag, or is that mean and putting you on the spot?
Oh, okay. Ah!
Oh gosh, I would hope everybody would know that's not what we're.
Trouble.
Yeah.
Make a mode 1 brassy, you're a brassy-ish. And should they be afraid of that if they hear that, for instance?
No.
I don't know, Mary, you're pretty scary. I don't know. One thing I was telling the two of you about when we spoke yesterday was a student I worked with this week. We were introducing a lot of these exercises, this mode 1, a lot of high speech work and some belt songs. And at the end of an hour, she said, oh my gosh, I just feel so tired. Tomorrow I'm not going to have any voice. And I said, really? Because we were in the process completely. I said, send me a text tomorrow morning and let me know what your voice feels like. So she got up the next morning and she sent me a text and she said, I feel great. I feel fine. And I was like, of course you do. Because it's just like going to the gym and having a good workout. You actually get stronger. And you know if you are injuring yourself, and you just have to keep your head screwed on.
So let's go, Mary, you brought it up a couple times. Let's go. I know there's a ton of questions I'm leaving behind for a few minutes. Let's go there. Let's talk about mix. And you and I, the three of us talked about this yesterday. When you hear that term mix, what's your first reaction if a student came in and said that?
If they said what?
Mix, that I want to learn how to mix.
Well, I would, first of all, the first thing I would do if they said that, if they said it the way you sounded when you said that, I would say, done. Done. You're mixing. So then, okay, say that to me again.
I want to learn to mix.
And then I would say to you, sing those words to me in that pitch range.
Oh, I'm not going to do that.
And you would go, I want to learn to mix.
Yes.
I want to learn to mix. You would say that. I mean, that would be where you would sing it. And I would say, great. And basically, we would be doing a speech dominant mix that way.
That's what I want to get to.
If they said to me, Mary, I want to learn to mix. I feel like, and I'd say, well, you're in a good place. Sing that. I want to learn to mix. They'd be there. And I'd say, that's great too. All good. And then you would start to discuss what those differences are and how they coexist throughout the range.
So to our conversation, and Norm, we talked about this as well yesterday, do you want them to understand mix can be a chest mix or a head mix? Do you want a distinction between those? Because to me, they're different in their understanding and their own perception of sound, or it doesn't matter to you?
Is that a question for me?
Either of you, yeah.
Okay, then ask it again if it's to either of us.
Yeah, do you have your students distinguish between a chest mix or a head mix, or you just let the language of mix be all-encompassing?
Absolutely not. No, I think I thought that's what you and I were just talking about.
Yeah, that's what I want to make clear.
Okay.
That the two sounds you were demonstrating were mode 1 or mode 2
Right,
chest.
because they have to be able to make those distinctions in the same range, especially that transitional range between A4 and D5. That becomes very critical for women's voices. And men's voices, same mix range, G4 to D5. Same range, they're going to make those distinctions too. And they can obviously do head mix, which is very similar to the soprano mix for a woman, and the chest dominant mix, and the called belt. All of those can exist in that range. Mm-hmm. So what's hard is sometimes it's hard to identify when they're actually first singing what that distinction is. That's a good thing. We can ultimately hear it from the outside, but it feels very similar. That means that the balance is right, right? But there's a difference between, let's see if you, I don't know if you could even hear this. Never, never know. Never, never know. Both of them speech, was there a difference for you? Yeah.
Yes.
Both of them are speech-like because they're probably around, what am I, B flat? Probably around. You have a piano?
I don't.
Anyway, isn't that weird? We don't even have a piano. I never talk without a piano. But that's the deal. And so so that was a spoken quality that you can access in a soprano mix song like all I want is a room somewhere. Has to be tilted toward head. Although Eliza Doolittle is talking with a Cockney, and so the feeling is you want a lot of speech there. What if she turned it all the way? All I want is a room somewhere. Then she is going to be chest dominant. But because it's stylistically, although the world is changing and these revivals actually include different kinds of singing. Lindsay Mendez did not do a Carrie Pipperidge that would have been done 30 years ago in the revival on Broadway of Carousel. Her Carrie Pipperidge carried a great deal of contemporary vocalism within the style. So it's very important not to just sit and say, okay, this is all going to be one thing. I'm a soprano. This is a soprano show. Because it isn't the way it functions anymore. We're always going back and forth between qualities and mixes, even in a soprano role.
Great question. Colin asks, are men's mode 2 functionally different than women's mode 2? And should we have different expectations for mode 2 for different genders?
Different genders, all the genders. In a non-binary world, which we are in now, It seems to me that we are going to look at the larynx as neutral, capable of many different sounds. The differences really would be in the size of the larynx, which has to do with what has to do with genetics, basically. And because a lot of women have large larynges and they might have deeper sounds and access to more of the sounds that traditionally men have carried. But in my experience, the best thing you can do for a man is to build a powerful falsetto that will equal my soprano or the better sopranos, and that you would give a woman access to as much chest as she can possibly comfortably carry to build the extended range both ways. So my answer to that question is, yes, I think the mode 2s need to be developed the same way. Men, male, and what do you think, Norman?
Well, one other way to say that is in that middle range, really it can sound just the same. It's quite astonishing.
It is. I honestly, when I heard one of my students on a video singing in falsetto, I thought it was a woman.
And the women will typically stretch much higher, and the men will typically stretch much lower. But that middle ground, there's a lot I think we're going to still be discovering, but a lot that we see that matches pretty darn exactly.
Yep.
Back to mode 1 for a second. Kate Baker writes, I hear so many music theater singers going higher than they should in belt, and they sound way too shrill. They should mix. Why are they doing this? What I hear on Broadway is much better than this.
That says a whole lot in terms of the definition of mix. And it also suggests, and I think I should probably mention this, aesthetic judgment about tone. Because when you asked me to make, did you say make a like nasal tone, or no, you said oral twang? I can't remember.
Nasal twang, we mentioned.
And I made what would be considered a really hideous tone, I suppose, in classical terms. I was looking for a hideous tone, but it's all good. It's all good. It's got to be all good. And it is not I make this is a soapbox for me for 1 second. It is not my job to judge aesthetically the sound. It's my job to make sure it can be repeated in a healthy way.
Interesting.
That doesn't mean that's the only sound. I mean, if a student makes a truly nasal wah kind of sound, that's like wah, that is for something specific. It's not for me to say, well, it's not attractive, so don't do it. I need to be sure they can. And then that's just one of many, just as the commercial belt between this woman or whoever asked the question, she was talking about the high belt going way high. Mm-hmm. So that is above the middle voice between G4 and D5. Above that, we have Elphaba. We have every gospel song you ever heard. We have have these sounds that are extremely viable and important as part of the expressive canon, male and female.
Mm-hmm. You're going to love this question, both of you. What do you think is the ideal age to begin cross-training young singers? High school, middle school, post-puberty, undergrad? People are still asking, right, this question, which is interesting to me.
Well, it's still, go ahead.
I guess I don't know why you wouldn't start right away with anybody exploring all this whole voice. So for me, it just would make sense to start when they start.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And when we were younger, we kind of in church, we would have sung hymns, and we would have been singing like that. And when we sang to the radio, I mean, I grew up in the 80s with Foreigner and right, whomever. We would have sung. Who are some of the women? I'm terrible about. Who would I have listened to back in the day? Linda Ronstadt, maybe, or
I love
yeah. So we were making those sound. We were cross training. We just didn't call it
That's
that.
right. That's right.
We were making sounds. So,
Yep.
sorry, Mary, did you have something to add?
No, that's right.
This is going to lead us down a different path, which I think is really important. Thank you, Anne, for asking. Do you utilize a classical low abdominal approach to breath support with your music theater students? I'll let you two answer.
Yeah, I use classic appoggio technique, rip swing, transverse abdominal. I don't think that, okay.
No.
Dancers can breathe for singing, even though it feels as though you'll hear them complain that they can't swing their ribs because the importance, especially if it's ballet, of keeping the ribs closed. That action of the ribs can happen in the back, and does and should. And I don't teach breathing differently to musical theater students.
We do. Sorry, Norm. Do you want to jump in before I?
That's it.
We do have evidence that shows that if you take too full of a breath that one might for classical singing, that you can create too much subglottic air pressure in CCM or in belting. I mean, there is evidence, but the evidence that I've read talks that that the reason for the change of the air pressure has more to do with the vocal fold closure than it does with the actual air pressure itself.
Absolutely.
And that interaction. So there are some differences, wouldn't you agree, with the approach to breathing for your music theater singers?
I'm going to tell you that I actually don't.
That's very interesting.
Because they have to be able to make shifts right away on a dime and carry a very sustained line in a mode 2 and then move back into a chest dominant sound. I think they need to have firm body support all the time. And I don't see a conflict there. Joan Melton wrote a book, Dancing with Voice. Have you heard about that?
Of course.
And she did some studies about it, very successfully actually. And I think we're going to continue looking at it. Do you have, Kari? Do you have a feeling that this needs to be very different?
Not. Well, listen, my feelings come from the research I read, right? And experientially, of course. And I know even like Alita Scarce's book talks about this as well. And again, some recent research by Sundberg that I've read that isn't recent, but it's recent to me, where they do talk about their subtle differential measurements that are they're finding with the subglottic air pressure. But again, it's not necessarily because the breath strategy is different. And this is, I think, the important point. It's because the glottal closure, the source.
So that's breath control. That's learning how. Yeah. So I don't think we're talking about this solid body structure, which is so good for actors and singers. Because, for example, training an actor to perform in a Shakespeare play elevated speech, which is so much of what we're teaching when we're teaching chest dominant singing. I would very much encourage the same kind of breathing that I would for singing. So and you wouldn't want to come up with that either.
Goodness, yes.
No, you want a free flow of air no matter what they are doing.
I would say that in classical singing, we do I spend with my classical singers a great deal of time talking about breath management more than music theater singers, because again, the airflow, with the open quotient being higher, the breath management feels differently.
sing less air. Could totally agree with you. But what
Yeah.
I'm going to say to you about that is we're cross-training these students. So consequently, we spend a lot of time making sure they are proficient in controlling the airflow for sustained mode 2 singing. Then when they shift, yeah, it's easier to sing gimme, gimme. That's a lot easier. That's why you get 12 bars on with no breath, no problem, if you really do this right, because you have that long closed phase and it's much easier to do. But that same singer needs to turn around and sing "What Good Would the Moon Be?" and carry those lines.
I love that.
Or an opera aria.
Yeah, so I'm just so happy to hear you say all that, because I do think that it can get overlooked with music theater singers.
I agree with you, and I think the impression we get. Oops, time's up. The impression that we get sometimes is that it's just one side or the other. The whole point of what Norman and I are trying to say is that don't lose any of it. Don't lose any of it. Be sure that you are in go position for anything you have to sing, so that you're not just, oh, well, this is what I do. Because I think that limits you, and also the longevity of the voice is more at risk that way, I think, if you're just using the voice on one side.
Let's see if we can get a couple more questions. And Jordan asks, how do we get singers to continue the process when they are performing nonstop and old habits die hard?
Oh, that's a hard one. That's when you feel like a field medic. Because you're just trying to patch them up and send them back out again. It's hard. That's a hard one. But if you've gotten them late and they have never had really good foundational training, you just do the best you possibly can. This is a teacher asking the question, obviously, because they've had this sort of, the neurons are behaving a certain way. Their bodies say, this is the way we do. And you have to say, hold everything. Let's try to get some habits in place that will keep you healthy, and give them good exercises to keep doing, give them a protocol that will be helpful. Other than that, you can't go out there and live their lives for them, but you do hope that they will take care of themselves. That's all we can do really as teachers.
How do you take into account the use of microphone to amplify versus the actual body when discussing cross training? That comes from Daniel Knox.
I know Mary has a very specific thinking here. It's great.
I do have specific thinking that I don't train for a microphone in the studio. A lot of my colleagues do, and I think that's great too. But I don't, because I want them to have the acoustic experience of their voice and then sing the way they sing.
Well, and plus that's how they get hired. I always find that interesting. They get hired, they don't audition on a microphone.
Well, you say that now, Kari, but one of the casting directors that I spoke to not long ago said, guess what?
They're starting to change that.
We're going to start giving microphones to people. And I thought, oh, okay. But I mean, that may happen. But right now we still are in the position of encouraging them to go out and be in the room acoustically and use their voices in an energized and healthy way. I want to hear that. If somebody's on a mic, I want to take the mic away. If it's a master class, for example, and they're singing CCM, I want to take the mic away. I want to hear them. I want to hear what they do, because remember that time? Oh my gosh, it was a NATS thing. It was quite magical because, yes, you can hear this. And I'm thinking, well, that's weird. That's weird that a microphone is going to take the place of my voice. I'm doing so little. And so you want to feel that your voice fills a room and that you know it and understand it and it's you. And I think that's hard if you live in a mic. The mic is incredibly important on Broadway, and it certainly saves voices, and it can create a dynamic spectrum that we could never get any other way. in the range that we're singing, because we are not singing in a FOC. We're not trying to self-amplify.
And I would say a lot of our, just to carry on that, I think it's a great point there. A lot of our colleagues who are working exclusively in CCM do talk about the importance of the mic, and that you couldn't actually make the sounds you need for that genre without the mic. But we're looking at also the authentic life of a character, and you can't rely on a mic for that.
Well, on that wonderful note, this hour has gone far too fast. We clearly have to have you on again, because we're leaving some questions on the table, but I think that the questions have to some degree been answered throughout the conversation. So I cannot thank you both enough for joining us tonight. And I want to encourage our chatters to please go get this book. And in it, also there is a handout on your go-to webinar control panel. You will see a handout of developmental songs, and I just lost the webinar, so let me go back. There you guys are.
You asked me for a list of beginning belt songs.
Yes, so that is on there, and in your book as well, you list there's a great appendix of repertoire.
Sure.
So, let me just remind everybody as we say goodnight here that January 13th will be Chadley Ballantyne and Carrie Obert, and we're going to get into some conversations about some interesting research on twang. And they titled it Getting the Twang of It, Updates on the Physiologic, Acoustic, and Perceptual Characteristics. So I'm looking forward to that chat. But again, thank you, Mary and Norman, tonight for joining us. And we're getting lots and lots of thank yous for everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Have a happy holidays, and I hope to see you in January. Thank you so much. Stay with us just for a second, Mary and Norman.